right, so I think we can get started. It's right at 9, at least over on the West Coast. So, hi, my name is Jessica Orozco. I'll be your host today for this webinar. I am the VP of Sales for Platform.sh. With me today, I have the pleasure of being with one of our most valued customers, University of Missouri. They're going to be on the call today to talk about their migration of their entire web fleet of applications that they migrated over to the cloud. So we're really excited about this talk. We've actually we did the similar talk at the Higher Ed Web last year. So I'm really excited to get to do it again today with you guys. So just a few kind of housekeeping announcements. The webinar is scheduled for an hour. So we'll try our best to keep within about a 45-minute time frame for the discussion itself. So we can leave about 15 minutes or so for Q&A at the end. So as you have questions, please feel free to post them on the Q&A part of the webinar. So that way we can start to answer those questions first once we get to the Q&A portion. Also, just to kind of keep things interactive and have you guys participate in the discussion, we are going to be launching polls. So there's going to just be some questions that you guys can quickly answer so that we can just get some feedback from the audience and get this a little bit more interactive for you. All right, so let's get started. Hi, John and Paul. Let me introduce you to John and Paul. They are obviously both at the University of Missouri. Both are program analysts. Paul is the lead for the WordPress practice, and then John is the Drupal lead. So how are you guys today?
Not bad. Looking forward to some nice sunny weather finally.
Yeah, looks like it's a sunny day for you there, John.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I'm a virtual campus.
That's awesome. I love the background. Great. Well, hey, I'm going to give you guys just a couple seconds to talk about what your responsibilities are at the university, so that way the audience kind of can get that context before we get started with the story. So
Jess,
Paul,
you're going to move this first. Okay, can you move the slide real quick?
Oh yeah, sure.
There we go. And so I'm Paul Gills. I'm a programmer analyst at the University of Missouri. I've been there for 21 years. As Jessica mentioned, I'm the WordPress lead. So with John's help, the two of us together have kind of been architecting exactly how we want to move the university from our on-prem situation to a platform as a service provider.
I'm John Boyer. I do basically the same thing as Paul, but focus mostly on Drupal and other applications.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for that. All right, so before we get started, I wanted to talk about a little bit about Platform.sh and what we are, so that way everybody has that background, that context, if you don't know about us. We are a platform as a service provider, which means that we give developers tools so that they can work through faster development cycles. They can reduce the amount of bottlenecks, automate a lot of time-consuming tasks. It supports different technology stacks, so whether you're working with Drupal or WordPress, Ruby, Java, you name it, we host it and we can support it. And then it also runs on all the major cloud providers, so we partner with all of them. And it's built with security and compliance in mind, so we have PCI, SOC 2, Type 2, GDPR, so all those compliance needs are met on our platform. All right, so before we get started, I wanted to just do our first poll and ask you a quick question. So you'll see it pop up here. And so the question is, how many sites does your university or organization manage? Less than 100, 100 to 1,000, or more than 1,000? So if you guys can vote, that way we can get some insights as to who we have in the audience today. All right, and K-Frey, did that come over on your side?
Yes, it did.
Okay.
Are you able to see the results? Oh, no, sorry. So it looks like we have about 55% with less than 100, 9% with 100 to 1,000, and then 36% with more than 1,000.
Great. Well, that's good. That's perfect then. So that's really going to help us as we go through this story. So great. Well, thank you for that and for participating, everybody that did. We really appreciate it. So the journey. So let's talk about that. So Paul, why don't you kind of set the stage for us in terms of where the university was and kind of the things that you guys saw that you needed to fix and where you wanted to go.
Sure. The University of Missouri, when it comes to the web, has historically been very decentralized. And what I mean by that is any school, college, department, division that had enough money could hire their own developer, could purchase their own web servers, could hire a third-party service if they wanted. So we had a lot of sites in a lot of different locations created by a lot of different people in a lot of different titles. We had undergrad and graduate students creating sites. We had administrative assistants creating sites. We even had some fiscal operators creating websites. And some of those servers that they had were literally sitting under desks. And possibly as a byproduct of that decentralization, there weren't a lot of standards on campus either. We had a new administrator come in at one point and ask, how many sites does the university actually have? How many are across our domain that we own? And we didn't know. We didn't know what to tell them. We said, well, we can guess somewhere around 1,800 to 2,000. That's our best guess. But there's no central mechanism to be notified when somebody creates a site. So we literally have no way to tell you. And because of that lack of standard, everybody was doing everything differently. There was just no way to collaborate really. And even amongst the things that they were doing similarly, they would recreate that same wheel over and over and over again. So we essentially had like 25 years of unstructured, unorganized, uncurated digital sprawl everywhere. Now I joined the central web team, and the central web team was responsible for supporting the administrative services, chancellor, provost, admissions, those areas. And the chancellor at the time said, your charge now with setting standards across campus. But unfortunately, he didn't give us any authority to enforce the standards. So in a lot of ways, it was like herding cats. We'd go out and we'd talk to people and we'd get everybody on board with following some certain practices. And then no sooner did we get everybody going, then a dean or a director would say, well, I don't like those standards, and then off they'd go. And we'd be back out trying to, again, herd the cats back over. And so sometime around, back up. So that's extremely difficult to support from an institutional standpoint, right? When there's no standards. In fact, we started to do an inventory at one point, and we discovered that we had 13 different CMSs in use on campus. That's a lot of diversity to try to support. We also discovered a massive amount of abandoned sites, either because the division had lost a developer, or it was a grant-funded thing and they lost the grant. But these were critical websites, critical to the business needs of the university, but had no support. Sometimes we'd be called in to assist, but because there were no standards, it was so decentralized, it could take days just to figure out how to get into the site, let alone more time to figure out how all these pieces were working. And remember back, I said that they could also get third-party hosts. Well, a lot of times, that would be an individual employee that set that up, that purchased that third-party host. So if that employee left, it could take weeks and sometimes months for the university to convince that host that we actually owned it. So sometime around 2008, 2009, the Central IT Division led a campaign, led a program to minimize the number of servers on campus and began to offer centralized web hosting. And this was a huge step forward for the university. We finally had at least some standardization on how websites were hosted. However, it was just hosting. There were no standards as far as how you could use it. And we began to, I wouldn't say quickly, but we began to see some conflicts rise up, especially between central IT, that division, and the developers, and then central IT and the administration. And what I mean by that is, at one point we were on PHP 5.3, a good 2 years after it had gone end of life, and the developers were demanding that it gets upgraded into something more modern. But the central IT, the server administrations, were very adverse to upgrading because their goal was stability in the stack. In addition, administration, especially like admissions, they had campaigns coming out, they needed sites, new sites brought up quickly. But the central IT division was a very siloed, or it still is a very siloed organization. There's a team for creating accounts. There's a team for the database. There's a team for files. There's a team for server administration. There's a team for Apache and PHP administration. And they're organizationally and physically separated. So from the time you put in a request for a site to the time you actually could log in and do something was often 2 weeks to move through all that bureaucracy and all those different teams. So go ahead and go into the next slide. We knew this wasn't sustainable. The number of sites being requested was exponentially going up. It's just not sustainable. And sometime around 2015, the Central IT Division came to the Administration to Services Division and said, you know, our strategic goals for server administration is no longer aligning with your strategic goals for hosting, and we think it's in your best interest if you move to a third-party hosting solution. And so that's when we began to research. So we knew we needed some standards, right? We knew we needed to standardize things. 13 different CMSs, there's no way we can support that. So we narrowed that down to 2 and landed on Drupal and WordPress. And if you've ever set up WordPress and Drupal, you know there are dozens of different ways you can configure and set those up. So we knew inside even the CMSs themselves, we needed to start creating and enforcing some standards, as well as just standardizations across the board. In the past, developers would utilize Shibboleth and LDAP for authentication, or they might use local accounts. But inside of those, they do them in different ways. I think John at one point had mentioned to me, he'd seen a dev spend a month on setting up Shibboleth. So we knew we needed to standardize just kind of across the board. We knew we needed to be faster, and I'm not necessarily performance and uptime, although we do need that, and I'll talk about that in just a second, but we need to be able to respond faster. Again, back to admissions. Admissions is so critical to the university. If they've got a campaign, they can't wait 2 weeks for us to even get an account. We've got to be able to respond faster. We need to be able to update pieces in the stack faster. We need to be able to stay up to date with the industry, as well as just keeping the sites up to date. We also knew we needed flexibility. In the past, when we were finally able to update like PHP, if the community came together and said, we're ready to move to 7.1. Well, a single department might come back and say, oh, wait, we've got code on 7 that isn't compatible with 7.1 and we don't have a dev. And that single department could hold up progress for the entire rest of the community. So we knew we needed flexibility so that individual sites could have their own individual requirements met, but not hold anybody up. We also knew at some point we were going to need different stacks besides just a PHP stack. We had some Ruby apps, we had some Python, we have lots of Java on campus, we've got .NET, we've got a lot of different things. And while we knew we needed to start with a piece we could manage, we knew in the future, whatever provider we selected was going to need to be able to support us with that flexibility. We also knew we needed a lot more efficiency. We have a lot of teams of one or armies of one. One person taking care of all things web for a whole bunch of different websites. And if you're an army of one, a team of one, it is just about impossible to take a vacation, right? If you're the only person responsible for 40 or 50 sites, you can never leave or you can never get away. And so we knew we needed to create, or at least have some efficiency between collaborators and make that between different developers and make that collaboration a lot easier so someone could step in and back each other up. If you worked in higher ed at all, you know that do more with less is a common refrain. It's a big mantra, right? And we knew that we were going to have to be able to manage more sites with fewer resources. As an institution, we didn't want to have situations where a grant running out left a critical website without any support. And we did need performance and uptime. We needed better performance. Our on-prem solution was multiple LAMP nodes, load balance, and it was decent. It was pretty good. We knew, at least on the WordPress side, we could sustain 66 pages per second without any degradation, which is good. And luckily, we've never had an active shooter on campus, so we've never had a drastic surge in traffic. But we knew we wanted to increase that, as well as allow everybody to have that performance. Trying to figure out a good caching solution for WordPress in a load balance situation could be kind of complicated. We also we had development servers on campus, and everybody, when you got an account on this central web hosting, you had access to the development server and a development database, but there was no automated mechanism to keep those things in sync or to bring changes from production down into development. So we had a lot of cowboy coding going on. If you're not familiar with that term, we had a lot of developers logging into production and testing and making changes directly in production. And we had many situations of developers taking down critical websites for hours and sometimes days. So whatever solution we selected, we knew we wanted the ability to clone out those those production environments down into isolated development environments where developers could go test changes, make sure things work before migrating it back up into production, so that we can move those changes with confidence that we weren't going to have downtime. We also knew, as far as performance and uptime, we also knew we needed consistent backups. That was another problem we had with people managing their own servers and doing things differently, is backups could be all over the place. So if you were stepping into a site you weren't aware of, you had zero ideas where the backups were. Go ahead and go to the next slide.
Well, thanks for that setting the stage, Paul. Appreciate that. All right, so John, I know that you guys came across some obstacles, some challenges as you started down this journey. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that and some of the issues that arose.
Yeah, Paul and I together have been doing this for a long time. So we kind of knew some of the issues that we'd come into, but with any project, that list kind of changes over time. So, we broke this up into a couple different kind of stages where we had the exploration, the alpha stage, and the production stage, and then, our future stage. But pretty much instantly in the first stage, which we called exploration, we noticed that we just really needed better DevOps practices because, we had some, but there wasn't really much DevOps happening on campus. And really, when we use that term, what I really mean is we needed, better tooling, workflows, and communication systems. So on the tooling and workflows side of that, echoing back to what Paul said, we really just needed a consistent set of tools and a consistent workflow to get the job done. It doesn't necessarily mean that what someone was doing before was wrong, but even within individual developers or departments, Paul and I were both using Git before this, but I'm pretty sure we were using it in different ways. Or completely different ways. Local development, some people were using, multiple people were using different ways to develop locally. So we needed those to be consistent because any developer needed to be able to jump into any project and be able to hopefully get going very quickly. And the way that our organization has historically been set up is we are not in a setup that is like an agency. Everything is very spread apart. Now we're coming closer together as we've went through this process, and we've gained other developers to the central area. But ultimately, a lot of the services when we explored this gave workflows that were more akin to an agency where there's a centralized group of people that all go through a code review process and all these very standardized methods. So we didn't necessarily have that. We were more set up like an open source project where we had a whole bunch of people spread apart and we're all kind of working to the same goal, but we needed some more consistency so that everyone could work in the same way. So if someone's gone, I can go jump out to their site. And even across CMSs, we started to realize, there's probably some things that Paul and I could do similarly below the CMS level that could help us support each other. So, and going with that, we need consistent testing environments, and that goes both locally and remotely to be able to work through this process. So in addition to those pieces, which we'll talk about in a second, we just needed some more communication. As Paul had talked about, you know, everything that we had previously was very spread out. So in a lot of cases, to get this type of service to work, we had to go out and just do some communication where we knew there were some services that we were not going to be able to bring into the cloud. For instance, our account management and our local GitLab instance, we had to go out and make those connections with those people to figure out how we were going to hook those up to whatever service that we used. Additionally, working with the individual developers, which kind of goes down to turning our hosting platform into a service. Ultimately, you know, if we need to get people that are not Paul and I to do this type of work, we need to have deliverables and code and documentation that we can go out and give to a developer so they can get started. We need to have, going back to DevOps, we need to have, you know, these tooling and workflows, which in a lot of cases in our industry means gadgets, or it feels that way when you start down this process. You know, we all needed to be able to use Git. We all needed to be able to use, since the main two CMSs that we were using are using PHP, we decided pretty early on that we needed to be able to use Composer. Composer was much easier for me to use in Drupal to begin with than it was for WordPress, because Drupal 8, which we were starting to standardize on, had a lot of those things built in, where WordPress wasn't. And then an additional thing that I didn't know, not being someone who'd used WordPress in the past, is that, you know, Drupal's not so much as, or at least Drupal 8 isn't tied to the domain as much as WordPress. So we needed to have some of these like scripted pieces around our development so that when you bring up this site locally, or you bring it up on a remote dev environment, or you bring it up on master, all the stuff that happens, which in certain cases, some of that is just the architecture of the CMS. In other ways, that's just, you know, a lot of these scripts that run to make sure everything's prepared to go live. So our devs could really get a site, and you know, that really means us working in some fashion in an afternoon on any of these services, but refining to scale became kind of difficult. If you go to the next slide, we like to share this diagram. This diagram is the suggested WordPress setup on AWS. There's a Drupal one that's very similar to this. And this says nothing against AWS. AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, you know, all those things are really cool. And a lot of the technologies we use are based on that. But in this exploratory phase where Paul and I were building things that maybe our bosses wouldn't give us the time to mess around with on a day-to-day basis, we were able to build some of these cool things. So Paul and I set this something similar to this up for WordPress and Drupal multiple times, actually. But as we started trying to refine that to scale, it kind of became obvious that, you know, was this, with our team being relatively thin as a university, was this something that we could actually make happen over and over and over again? You know, you have to realize in this process that we're going through, that we're talking about, a site we may have 100 site builds a day, 200. I mean, depending on what's happening. In some cases, if we have to touch the whole stack, which we've done, we may need to rebuild every site on multiple environments, you know, a couple thousand times. So getting this to happen over and over would require a lot more overhead than a service like Platform would give us. And additionally, with all of these microservices, which we still have a lot of microservices, all of these services in there, we were starting to figure out, you know, is it actually possible once it gets beyond Paul or I, or even between the two of us, to be able to support and explain and get other people to support pieces of that. So with that, with the microservices, we kind of knew going into it that we would have to, like we said, that there's some of the campus services that we'd have to hook up into this. But over time, since we primarily work with the marketing efforts on campus, over time, a lot of the services that we've used have moved to cloud services. So historically, on a LAMP stack, you might have everything built into one server, a monolithic server. But because we'd started to use other services and we knew there were going to be some things that weren't compatible with a cloud service based on local restrictions or regulatory restrictions, or that we just wanted to have things that worked better, we had to start looking at microservices. So for instance, Platform uses SendGrid to send external emails. We had to figure out on campus, can we get that service to work with our local email instance? Fastly, a CDN that some projects use. For the policies surrounding that external service, it seems silly to someone working at a non-university or government agency to even be thinking about this, but we had to figure out, do our internal policies even allow us to pass traffic over something like that? And then our GitLab instance hooking that up. So that was interesting, and that required even more communication because back to the idea of sometimes people in different type of industries find this laughable, but each one of these services ends up kicking off a project with compliance or potentially contract negotiations, which luckily a lot of them, by using a service like Platform versus something else, we were some of those things were already bundled in. We had the advantage of, well, SendGrid's already there, so we can work with that. So that took a while, but then as we got into actually building this out on Platform, we had some initial hurdles in the exploration phase. So the first one was single sign-on. Ultimately getting the CMS to work on the Drupal end, that was relatively straightforward, and Platform has a lot of good demo projects out on GitHub. For both of us, I think getting WordPress and Drupal to work, was relatively straightforward process. But within that, some of the more specific parts, we ran into some initial hurdles that maybe we didn't anticipate initially. So first off, we have single sign-on. We moved from historically using an LDAP-based authentication method on most of our sites. We had a few Shibboleth, but historically we'd used LDAP. We determined that wouldn't work in the cloud based on regulatory issues or campus restrictions. And we also wanted to use Shibboleth because we thought it was more secure. Well, it turns out, Shibboleth is really cool, and it's actually some of the underlying technologies are the basis of other single sign-on systems. But it turns out not a lot of people who are outside of education and government use Shibboleth or that specific implementation of SAML. So where a lot of things that you deal with in the CMS world, there's really interesting blog posts about and books or anything like that, classes. You can spend all day reading about Gutenberg, for instance, on WordPress. But if you want to go look at how Shibboleth is set up, there's a lot of dry documentation and things like that. So figuring out how to script that, because not only do we want to get it set up once, but every time we bring up a site, we want to have Shibboleth enabled and set up in a consistent method. So working on that, that took a lot longer to just get those set up as libraries, have our own configuration that's syndicated out to individual sites, and then work with the centralized accounts team to get those sites registered. Additionally, our CMS strategy changed in the middle of this exploration. At first, we were hard and fast Drupal and WordPress, and anything that we got, we were going to put in either WordPress or Drupal. It turns out when you hit this many sites, you find some sites that are needed for whatever reason, that have good reasons for existing, but they almost never get edited. In that case, we changed our CMS strategy to include static files or static-based sites. So one thing that's nice about those is, they're cheap, they're not as prone to security issues, and they're really great for sites that get updated once a year, twice a year, maybe even every other year. So we ended up putting some of those on AWS S3, and then more recently, we've been moving some static sites to Platform as well that need to have a better DevOps flow. So we changed the CMS strategy, but then we also started to run into things that were like apps. Now, we consider Drupal and WordPress to be apps the way that we have them set up, definitely, you know, but we ran into things that were quote unquote websites, which, everything's a website, everything's an app. But we started to run into things like financial services applications for our HR and things like that. And we started to realize, should we be hosting those centrally or should we be hosting those as the marketing team, or should this, go back to a team and figure out if this is actually, if our department's actually the best place to be housing and maintaining those. So yeah, we ended up going through a lot of that. Some of the things that we thought were websites were CNAME records out to other external services, and just a general discovery about what was a CMS app, what was an app, another app, what things didn't exist anymore, what things were pointed to external services. Which then points us to—
John, just a real quick time check. We're about 15 minutes out from Q&A, so just wanted to give you that note.
Okay. I'll try to speed up.
Yeah.
So our security model there was a lot of difficulties with that because we work on that decentralized way with kind of in a decentralized model. We don't necessarily trust everyone in the same level as we do as potentially some agencies would. So we had to work on a method of creating keys and bot users to actually work within one of these cloud systems without having certain projects have access to each other. So with domains and Apache technical debt, we had way more domains than we've ever imagined. We had individual sites that had way more domains and domain logic than we ever thought. So we had to work on ways to move those into a cloud service. Historically, a lot of that logic, redirect this domain that is only used for marketing things into this site, exists in an Apache server somewhere that the developer doesn't necessarily have access to. So wrangling all of that data and figuring out a way to set it up within Platform was just a time-consuming process. And then traditional ops services. Platform has a great backup tool, but they aren't going to determine your policies for how your organization needs to keep or maintain backups. So in the past, with a centralized hosting service, another group handled the backups. They took them, they worried about how they were retained, and if we had a problem, it was their fault, or if we couldn't find them. So with this, we had to go work with, well, how long do we actually keep these backups? How often do we take them? And how long do we keep them? So multi-site, I'm going to let Paul talk about that.
Yeah, with multi-site, and it's specific to WordPress multi-site, if you've never used WordPress multi-site, especially in a domain-based multi-site situation where you're hosting multiple domains in a single instance, it is very tied to the domain. The domains are actually written into the database, and if the requests are coming from a different domain than what's there, it doesn't work. And at the time, none of the vendors that we looked at offered any solution to automate this process of taking your production environment and moving it into an ephemeral development environment and then fixing, air quotes, they're fixing that database. But Platform did give us the hooks that we needed so that we could script that. But it did take some time. It was a thing that we hadn't anticipated. Caching was another thing. I mentioned that earlier. Caching, especially in a load balance environment, can be extremely difficult on the WordPress side. And we also just had a lot of developers doing it in a lot of different ways, and trying to come up with a single caching solution that worked in Platform consistently for everything just took a little bit more research than we anticipated. Luckily on the Drupal side, you've already got caching built in, and that pretty much just worked right out of the box.
Great.
And then, and then you go ahead and go to the next slide. I'll say it while you're doing that. That containers just had far less resources than we were used to. In that shared hosting, you had 64 gigs of RAM shared across everybody, but in a container, you're limited So we just hadn't anticipated that.
All right, thanks guys. We are going to go into the next part of our discussion, which is about the phased approach you guys took to actually going and executing this plan now that you guys had time to evaluate and figure out these issues and how you guys were going to achieve those things. But before we do that, I wanted to do one other poll. So you'll see it launch here in a second. Question is, does your university or organization use DevOps approach? So if you guys can go and answer that question, and then K-Frey, give us the results whenever you have them, please.
So I think I shared it on the screen this time, but it looks like 9% say yes, 73% say some of them, but not all, and then 18% say not yet.
Great. Perfect. Thank you. All right. So, Paul, like I said, I think this is probably a good time to go through the phased approach that you guys had to be able to actually execute on this very daunting task of making change happen.
So as John mentioned, we had that exploratory phase. We were able to figure out, and I'm going to speak a little faster now to make sure we have time. We had that exploratory phase to kind of figure out all the pieces that we hadn't anticipated initially. The next phase then was the alpha phase, where we went to sites that we owned, we had control over, devs that we had direct access to, and started to move some sites out. It's really where the rubber hits the road, and we had to start thinking about, okay, how do we set this up so that we can maintain this and manage this at scale long term? And John and I quickly discovered or came to an agreement on that we needed some kind of blueprint, some kind of upstream, this concept of an upstream. And it's really just scaffolding. It's the folder structures, it's the deployment scripts, it's some of those pieces that the devs shouldn't have to worry about, like Shibboleth that John was talking about. And so that upstream is really just a repository with all the things that a project needs to succeed on WordPress. And we've got one for Drupal and one for WordPress. And so then, I said succeed in WordPress, I meant succeed on platform. And so what we do is every project, as we start it, we fork that upstream and give that developer that project. And we maintain that relationship so that they can pull down additional changes from the upstream, as well as we can go and we can see all of the projects that have been forked and see which ones haven't had an update. And this allows us to roll out changes globally to all the projects at scale. So if we have an update to Shibboleth that needs to go, we can push that into the upstream and then push that down to what we call all of our downstream projects. The next thing we needed to do in this alpha stage was come to a decision on dependency management. As John mentioned earlier, WordPress was not designed with Composer in mind. It's not really designed to work with Composer. You have to kind of massage it. So I had to, on the WordPress side, I had to go back and restructure that upstream to work with Composer. And now it does give us a lot of benefit. If you're, almost all of these platform as a service providers utilize Git to get your code into those environments. And if you're in WordPress and you've got 15, 16 different plugins and you're using one monolithic repo, well, to get those plugin updates, you have to commit all that plugin code into that one single repo. And so if there was an issue, you've got thousands of files possibly you might have just committed. So trying to figure out which file is the problem and then pull those pieces back out of that single monolithic repo was extremely difficult. So we landed on using Composer, as John mentioned earlier, for our dependency management. The next big hurdle that we did not anticipate in the alpha stage was developer education. We found that we had a large skills gap among even our own team between where we needed them to be and where they were. So go ahead and move to the next one. We had to begin to try to get them to shift their mental maps. And what I mean by that is, if you think about working in a typical LAMP stack, right? These developers were used to SFTPing their files to production or SSHing into the server and making changes. And now all of a sudden we're saying, no, you can't. You have to commit your code through Git and then push it into master. You can't actually touch master. You can't make changes in master. And in fact, I think there's a diagram on the next slide. It was just this big mental shift because now we're saying, okay, in platform, you're going to have this router app, this router container that's kind of like a load balancer, but it's kind of not. It's going to accept requests, and then it's going to route those requests to your application container. And your application container is read-only. You can't actually put your code there directly. It's just where your code lives. And then we're going to have a database container. And then over here, we're going to have a read-write container that we're going to mount to the application container. And that's where your actual files can go. And so it was just this large mental shift for the developers to try to get over. We also found that a lot of them had never used Git. When you're a team of one or an army of one, what's kind of the point? They said, if you know all the changes you made, why do you need to version control? But we weren't going to be working as teams of one or as armies of one. We had that goal of efficiency and allowing developers to move between projects easy. Git is an extremely powerful tool, but it doesn't force you into any specific workflow. And if you try to use Git without any agreed upon workflow, it's mass chaos. So we came up with a workflow for Git. And that next slide will show you the diagram of what we came up with. It's not an overly complicated workflow. It's, you start, you clone the repo locally, you make a branch, you do your development. Then once you're ready to go, you push that up to our GitLab instance and make a merge request. That fires off an integration with Platform that brings up that merge request environment so you can test. And once you're totally okay with all those changes and you're ready to bring that into production, you accept that merge request and bring it up. So not an overly complicated workflow, but if you think about it as a developer who has never used Git, has been through an hour-long class, and now you give them this and say, okay, start using it, it's really overwhelming. So we went back and we said, okay, we need some classes. We've got to get these people in classes. So we brought some Git classes in, and we started teaching them or getting them up to speed in how to use Git. But then quickly discovered that Git in the classroom, man, that's really different than using Git in the real world. And so we just had to kind of give them some time to get up to speed. Same thing for dependency management. Very few of our developers had ever used Composer or dependency management. And now we're saying, okay, in order to update a plugin, you've got to run through Composer. You've got to use Composer to make that update. And we had a lot of them going, but can't I just click the update button right there in the admin console? So we had to kind of get them used to it. This also brought up, I'm going to jump to CLI overload because it kind of goes in with it. We had a lot of developers who we discovered were openly adverse to using the command line. They didn't want to use the command line. They didn't like Git because they had to issue these command line commands to use Git. And now all of a sudden we're saying, okay, you're going to have to use the WP CLI or Drush. You're going to have to use Composer in the command line and Git in the command line. You're going to have to use Platform's command line tool, which is awesome, by the way. John mentioned Lando. You're going to have to use Lando commands in the command line. And it was just this overload of trying to take these poor devs who hadn't done any of this stuff and then throw them into a scenario where they're having to use this on a daily basis. And there very was from the developers a sense of an increased workload going, I had this site on the LAMP stack and it worked perfectly. And now I have to do all this work to put it on the platform to have a site work exactly the same way. It just seems like a lot of extra work. And so John and I changed a little bit of our tactic to go, okay, we have to stop thinking about in terms of your site. We have to stop thinking of the law school website, the journalism website. We have to think about the university. We have to think about the institution and how this is going to increase our efficiency for everybody in the entire university. We want to make it so that you can go on vacation. We want to make it so that your site, if you get a better job or you retire, your site can continue to be managed no matter what. So from that, we decided, John and I both decided, what we really need is just more resources, better developer resources, a better onboarding experience. So we started trying to come up, try to automate all these complicated pieces for our developers. So one of those was standardizing on some local development. We've mentioned Lando a couple of times. That is what we landed on. It's a containerized, local and development environment that is very similar to how a platform as a service hosting solution would work, but all local. And it allows us to script in conjunction with a lot of platforms tooling and APIs. We could script a lot of the pieces so that a developer, once they cloned a repo, could start it up in Lando, and it would automate all the steps so they have an exact replica of their production website locally. And now they could cowboy code locally all they need to and get something working. Lando is kind of hefty though as far as resources. It does take a lot of RAM and CPU. So we had to also kind of come up with some hardware standards to get everybody up on newer machines. We discovered in the beta stage now. In the beta stage, we also discovered, and I should clarify, in the beta stages where we started going out to other developers, other sites, and taking volunteers who wanted to help us, that wanted to get into the system. And what we discovered in that beta stage was there were some divisions who were not okay with any downtime. Now, downtime in Platform is minimal. I mean, I'm talking like 90 seconds, and the bulk of that is just the DNS change. When you change the DNS to point to Platform, it takes a little bit before Platform knows that the DNS, that DNS change is replicated out across the internet, and Platform then knows that the DNS is pointed to it. It's only like a minute or two. But in the past, we had full control of the stack. We had control of DNS, we had control of the servers, we had control of certificate generation. We could control everything, so there was no downtime. And so we've had to change up how we do switchovers and deployments a little bit, is what we discovered. Sorry, where was I? Downtime during switchover. Okay, so then I think, John, you're talking about databases? Oh, and you're muted.
Oh, I'm muted. I'll try to speed up a little bit because we're low on time. So we have some database workflow challenges. The one thing to know about that is if you're pushing your database to production in this type of layout, you're probably going to experience some type of data loss. That's harder for some developers than others. But in this environment where you have multiple instances of the same site, you can't just push the database around to each place. So that was something that challenged external developers. With our DNS names, really quick, we have a domain name that was registered in 1987. So some of our topography choices were made before the World Wide Web. So we can't, some URLs that we could use locally easily are not as easily transferred outside of the university. So we had to do some things and do some more communication with campus networking people to make sure that worked. But at the end, it all worked out. It just takes extra time.
All right, so thank you. I'm sure there's a lot of really great takeaways that everybody took from that part of it. Before we move on to the reflection stage, where we're going to be having John go into where you guys are with this initiative and how, what else do you still have left to do? I just want to take the last poll. So we're going to launch it right now. The question is, what are your biggest challenges with development today? So there's multiple choice there. So it's either adhering to security and compliance standards, lack standardization in your workflow, or getting buy-in from your administrators or executives on implementing new solutions and tools. All right, and then whenever we get the results, Kayfrey, can you read them out?
Yeah, so it looks like 25% said adhering to security and compliance standards. Most people said lack of standardization in your workflow, and then 25% said buy-in from administration.
Great, perfect. All right, thank you for that. Okay, John, so walk us through where you guys are today.
So where we are today, the general availability mode of production, we think that we've moved 90% of CMS sites that were hosted centrally. That doesn't include some sites that we talk about in a second that we still keep finding sites over time that are in servers that are different places. So as we go through this, we keep bringing them in. But we think 90% of those CMS sites that were hosted centrally have been moved. And then that includes some sites that have been changed to static, and then some of the DNS changes that we've talked about. We think our workflow is really stable. Most problems that we run into in our team, Paul and I can get ourselves out of. And then as the developers get into this process, they get better about doing them, about getting themselves out of those problems as well. Very rarely do we have to, for the number of sites that we work on daily, do we have to actually submit tickets to Platform. So we feel pretty good about that. And we feel like we can explain the system to people. We have a bunch of middleware that we've built, which essentially ties all of our systems together. We would like to have it in a final control panel state where everything's really tightly wrapped together, but now, you know, it's kind of in some more utility states where they're automated, but there are different applications that we have to bring back together. Our WordPress and Drupal performance has been great. It's we've load tested all this stuff. On WordPress, it's the biggest gain. I think it was 350% speed increase. Our Lighthouse scores have went up across the board, and things like that. We have an initial testing framework that has really helped us. It's rolled out on a few sites, and Paul and I actually currently, as we speak, have been working on trying to get that into general availability mode, where we can just be more certain that when we deploy stuff, or when someone who is not familiar with a specific site, or if someone moves into our team, they can make changes and know that their code won't break anything. And then, of course, we have standardized our local development setups as far as hardware, in general, editors in different teams, and then the testing. So our future plans, which are production 2.0, very quickly, we want more automated testing, because we want to get into more automated CMS and plugin module updates. This is a bigger issue on the WordPress side, because that's a big selling point. Drupal is actually trying to introduce that as well, automated updates, but we're trying to solve that problem on our sites, and we've made some pretty good headroom. Just finding newly discovered sites and domains. You know, every week we have to investigate a host name that all of a sudden comes up as someone's contract ends, and figure out, is it a CMS site, or can it be, or should it be, and should it move into this? Guardrails we want to have as we get into this process, which we have been for a while. We know some of the problems people will run into, so we want to script our way out of, have automated scripts within our development environments and in production environments to make sure they don't make mistakes we don't want them to do. Better configuration management, so that when we have different environments up all in different places, everything's working properly. More automated SSO provisioning. Our shibboleth stuff is 99% automated on the master environment, but we need to have that on the sub environments so that people can still use shibboleth there. General auditing of Composer, NPM, Drupal, Composer and NPM libraries, Drupal and WordPress modules and plugins, and then general security practices. We already scan our sites, but that's something that we can always be better at and always do better at. And then Paul, WordPress multi-site support, which is always fun.
More WordPress, or more multi-site support.
So Paul, just real quick, it would be great if you could just walk us through this slide of where you wanted to be, just to kind of remind everyone, and then going into how you saw Platform help you guys accomplish this goal.
Sure. So remember, if you think back to it, we wanted more standards. We wanted to be able to respond faster to changes. We wanted to have more flexibility tied into more efficiency, and we needed more performance and uptime. Specifically, how Platform helped us get there. While they didn't necessarily give us standards, Platform is very much like GitLab, or not GitLab, but Git. It's this extremely powerful platform that doesn't impose any workflows for you, but it gives you the ability to begin to set some standards. In order to get everything to work the way you need it to, you can begin to set standards on there and entice people to come in. It definitely makes us faster. Our only bottleneck now is really accounts creation, and that's on us. So once those accounts are created, I can have a site up, a project up, ready, and give it to a developer within 2 to 3 minutes. Flexibility, we definitely have more flexibility. In fact, I had a developer the other day, because in general, from that upstream, we set everybody at PHP 7.2. I had a developer come and say, hey, my project has some code that needs 7.1, it can't go to 7.2, can I push that back? Sure, yeah, just change that configuration file, push it back up and migrate it over and you're ready to go. So we have that flexibility like we wanted. We are absolutely more efficient. In fact, I'm really glad we went down this path. Now that we've had this COVID-19 thing, we are doing more with less. We were already doing more with less, and Platform has allowed us to focus on automating those tasks that developers shouldn't waste time on, to free up their time to automate things that they need automated so that they can spend more time doing the things that everybody else needs them to do, like building new sites. So we absolutely become more efficient. Performance and uptime, as John mentioned, WordPress, we've seen a 350% increase in page requests per second that it can handle. And that's across the board. That's not just for our enterprise sites. That's for even the lowest tier sites. All of them are performing faster. As well as that uptime, it's rare if ever there's a downtime. And even with those backups, we had a situation where a deploy went bad and we had to roll back. We were able to bring that environment back up within 2 minutes from the last snapshot, if I remember the timeline correctly. So I mean, a 2-minute downline or downtime when somebody accidentally made a mistake is really good.
Great. Well, thank you so much. That was a great talk. I always love hearing you guys speak because you're so passionate about it, and it's always awesome to see what you guys are doing. So we come to the end of the story, but we would like to open up to some Q&A. So let me see if there's any questions on the Q&A forum. So I believe one of the questions that we received was, what is your Git platform of choice, GitHub or GitLab? I believe you guys are using GitLab, correct?
We are using GitLab. It was already available on campus as a service from the Central IT division. And we try to eat our own dog food as much as possible. So we are using GitLab.
But we like it.
Yeah, and we like it. It's not that we don't like it. It's just, that's what we had. It wasn't necessarily, we didn't have a process where we chose GitLab over GitHub or Bitbucket. In fact, we were on Bitbucket before we were on GitLab. The nice thing is with Platform and the way we have everything set up, switching isn't that big a deal. The hardest piece would be all the accounts. We'd have to switch up accounts. But again, that's on us. So it's just, as long as you have Git, the platform that you're using for that repository management is less crucial to decide on. It's more of what then fits your business needs.
Okay. The next question on here is there a best email option for your sites while using Platform.sh? Emails from your site, forms, etc.
So I don't, so that's part, so we, for emails, on anything that isn't an administrative email, and that being like a new user registration and just those general administrative emails from the CMS. Everything else we push to Qualtrics because we've got a campus-wide license with Qualtrics, mostly because Platform really isn't an email provider. They can't, you'll have to talk to this, at least that's just not what they do. They're not, their services aren't set up to be SMTP services, right? So you would need to use like a SendGrid or something else. But for us, we push most of that over to Qualtrics since it's already set up to handle it, and we don't have to give users of the CMS access to build forms in WordPress or Drupal.
SendGrid is available
Yes, it is.
on the app container. So I believe there's almost no setup on the platform side. Your CMS will just send emails. They'll go through SendGrid. You do locally. One of the things that we ran into that we mentioned a little bit is because we operate our email locally, some of the trusted hosts, trusted email server settings that I'm blanking on what the individual config, like Platform can help you with this, but you have to approve. Your local server has to have that SendGrid account whitelisted so that it doesn't mark emails from your site as spam.
All right, thank you guys. Next question. Do you have a standard procedure for uploading and managing documents and directories on Platform.sh, like PDFs, printable forms, etc.?
On Drupal, we try to, stick with, in most cases, I think on the CMS, we try to keep the files directories at the location that the CMS would expect them at. So as far as on the CMS level in Drupal, we use built-in Drupal modules to manage. I think there's a couple in core to do file and image management, and those are just uploaded onto Platform in locations where you would configure them within Drupal. Now, as a larger university, we use the digital asset management software to manage our large repositories of all the graphics and media available for all of campus.
On documents, I'll chime in real quick. On documents like PDFs and forms, we try to encourage most sites or most owners to utilize Box. We have a campus-wide agreement with Box through EDU or through, well, I don't remember how it's through. And so then that gives the owners of those PDFs the ability to go and make edits to the PDF and versions of the PDF directly instead of trying to manage that in the CMS. So we've shifted most of those types of documents out of the CMS and then back over to that Box service.
All right. Bill Tran had a question. What tool are you planning to use for automated updates and regression testing?
So on automated testing, we do a crawl of all the sites, or that the piece that John was talking about earlier that we're starting to implement across the board is Screaming Frog in a headless mode that crawls the sites and looks for any server 500 errors and any internal 404s to give us an early warning. Then we're implementing BHAT for behavioral and functional testing, and then we're using Backstop for visual regression. Yeah, Backstop.
And then there's some open source tools that we've been using with GitLab. One of them, Renovate, to do some automated composer updates that basically creates a merge request. The tests are run against the platform branch or a platform testing branch, and then the results are reported back into GitLab.
Right.
We could talk for 3 hours about that, but
oh yeah, that's where we're in right now. That's that stage where it is all the automated testing. So
yeah. Do you run any Drupal multi-sites, John?
We do not currently run any Drupal multi-sites, but we are thinking about it. At any time, I tend to prefer individual Drupal sites for a number of reasons. But there are situations where groups that have a lot of sites that are very similar, it might make sense for. So we have, especially with budget restrictions and things like that, we've been looking into that process. But right now we don't run any of those.
Okay. What's the process you use on Platform.sh to make sure that you have no abandoned sites? For example, sites that are no longer being used.
We are actually, well, with this COVID-19, we are actually more quickly moving from a decentralized model to a centralized model. So most of those sites now, no matter where they lived originally, are going to be managed by our team. Right now, we use GitLab and check last commits or the last date of the last commits to see which sites haven't been touched. As far as seeing which sites literally have just not been updated content-wise, we'll probably use some form of automated testing to try to figure that out.
Yeah.
But we haven't necessarily tackled that question in full yet.
One nice thing when we're talking about automated tasks across our whole portfolio, I mean, there's a lot of great options within Platform to do stuff like that. There's the API and the CLI, which the support people essentially talk about hand in hand, because most things that exist in the web API exist in the command line as well. So you can write little applications to run API calls against Platform to tell what the last time the commit, or when the last time files were committed. You can, in the command line, you can use standard bash tools to run operations against every site. So maybe if there's a drush command you need to run to figure out something about every Drupal site, you know, I have ways to do that. So we've actually worked with that both ways, either through the API or the command line. And that's one of the reasons that initially when developers see the command line and they're like, well, this just seems like a lot of work to be able to use, or even API. No, I don't think most of our external users use platform API calls directly through the web API, but a lot of those tools, not only are they useful for just opening up a command line terminal and doing something really quick, but they give you kind of the ability to run operations against a lot of stuff. We actually recently had a simple SAML vulnerability, well, maybe this is 6 months ago, where every site, because we use a standardized setup, had a 0-day in its simple SAML configuration. So before, on our centrally hosted environment, and with distributed devs, we had to do a lot of stuff to get that updated, to get access. Now, within 2 minutes, I can tell the exact version that's actually running on production on every site we have. Yeah, and then, you know, pre our auto update mechanism, that was just giving developers a command to run and a process for doing that. So something that would have taken us weeks to make that update before we were decentralized went to an afternoon. And I'm pretty sure relatively soon we're going to be able to do the same thing within like a half hour. You know, I mean, we won't be able to be deployed all in a half hour, but we'll be able to know what is out of date and start the process to update it and run the tests like pretty quickly. So that is one nice thing that is great about the API and the command line tools, is that it's really, you can do a lot of cool stuff with it.
I think with that, one of the big things, and this is a little off script, but one of the big things Platform has given us is it has taken the responsibility of all this extra stuff, I'll say extra stuff that John and I don't have to worry about, so that we can focus on scripting all of the things that developers shouldn't have to worry about, like authentication and caching and all these extra pieces. And so really that's the big gain that Platform gave us, is they manage all of these pieces and then just expose these great hooks and APIs that we can then use to make ourselves more efficient. And that shibboleth is a great example. We are on the verge of being able to probably update our 125, 150 projects that we have right now, literally in like 30 minutes, if we had a 0-day. We are on that verge. Right now, it'd probably take about 3 hours, but we're almost to the point of getting that down to minutes. And that's exciting from an institutional standpoint, from a managerial standpoint, of saying, okay, we're no longer, it's going to be hours of dev time. It's going to be 30 minutes of dev time.
Yeah. I always kind of have the analogy of we're kind of like the contractor for the person that wants to build a custom home. You know, like we have all the skills and all the tools to do that. You just got to tell us what you need, and then, you know, that's something that you guys build.
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead, John.
Oh, I was going to say, I mean, it's kind of like the whole reason why you'd use Drupal. I mean, clearly, if you have an unlimited team, you know, you can make something that's completely customized to you that's going to work better than anything, right? But the reason that we use Drupal is because we don't want to build a whole CMS. We don't want to build the auth system. We don't want to do that. We work on the parts that are very specific to our organization. And it's the same thing with the hosting service that we used. You know, we want them to worry about like the Nginx config at like the very micro level. And we may chime in on something that we want it to do, or like asking questions of how we can maybe modify it. But we don't have a team big enough to have, you know, a really, really deep Nginx expert or like a caching expert. So Paul and I come up with crazy questions to ask Platform. Generally, they're, you know, one of the things we've really liked is they've been really receptive and open of, you know, if something's broken, they tell us exactly why it's broken. if there's something that we think that we want to do that may be kind of crazy, they'll, look into it for us. And a lot of times, they've been able to make things happen or tell us specific technical reasons of why it might be a bad idea based on like some of the setups that we have. So we're able to focus more on some of the stuff as far as supporting our developers, getting our sites moved in, working on automation processes that are specific to our stack and our university and our team.
Yeah. It's way more like a partnership, literally, than a contractor. It's here's a problem, and then the platform, will come back and say, maybe we can't do it that way, but here, how about try this way, and come up with actual solutions, not just, oh, you're a ticket, and I got to close it. It's definitely a partnership. Yeah,
absolutely. I'm not really sure of the context of this question, but it's aux for PDFs, OXAUX for PDFs.
I'm not familiar with either one of those, unfortunately.
I will say for the next question, or I guess you can.
Yeah, I'll read it. Do you have any need or experience with setting up FileZilla or other SFTP file management with Platform.sh?
So in general, so in general, we don't send code through SFTP. That's all through Git, and then a deploy process runs, and then generates the site or the application containers or cluster of containers. But for large file management, so say if you had gigabytes of PDFs, they have file mounts that are writable sections of the system. So we didn't really cover this, but the main PHP area that your application runs in is read-only. And that's generally for a number of reasons, speed, but also security. It's not able to be changed in flight. You have to redeploy the application to send another PHP code. However, your file areas are writable areas that, in general, PHP code, in this instance of these Drupal and WordPress sites, PHP can't execute. So for those file areas, if it's not something that happens through the CMS, there is actually a way to connect to that via SFTP through FileZilla or the command line. It's a little bit buried in the documentation, but I'm sure, Platform has a great Slack channel that we found out a lot of stuff with, but there's basically a command that you have to run, and then you can get an SFTP location. And if your key is set, then you can just use a SFTP client to connect to that mount.
Great, thanks, John. All right, there's one more question, we have an update on, so Platform has a beta feature called Source Operations that we just launched a few weeks ago that I know we gave you guys access to, but you have not been able to use it yet. So we're going to hold off on the question, do you have Platform.sh beta Source Operations, and what do you use it for? So we're going to have to skip that for now and provide you guys with some feedback later. But just wanted to thank you, John and Paul, again, for doing this webinar with us. We really appreciate it. I think there was a wealth of knowledge here that was shared. So thank you very much. And thank you for all of you who joined us today. There will be a recording of this session sent out later. So if you have any further questions, join our public Slack channel and Slack us. And also, we have upcoming webinars. So if you guys want to join those webinars, go to platform.sh/webinars to register. Thank you, everyone, so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.